foothills of Mount Lebanon. A convoy of T-72 Soviet tanks crunched down the highway in the opposite direction. President Assad waved goodbye from a hoarding. The road wound steeply uphill, corkscrewing through pine trees and slopes of gorse, and suddenly we were there. The Syrian frontier post, a rambling collection of concrete huts huddled among pines, a little under the summit of the mountain. One of the root causes of the Lebanese civil war was often said to be the weakness of the country's government and its inability to control an overheated economy. One aspect of this was the role still played in Lebanon by the Syrians. Although we'd left Syria behind us, Syrian troops in clumsy, ill-fitting khaki uniforms, so different from the chic designer camouflage of the Lebanese army, still manned checkpoints and intervals along the road. Syrian Mukhabara Range Rovers, their windows blacked out with frieze of Assad posters, stood parked beside pillboxes, painted the colours of the Syrian flag. On these concrete crash barriers, pockets of otherwise ubiquitous posters of the Lebanese Prime Minister Rafi Hariri, all jowls and double chins like some corpulent Italian waiter, were replaced by the Assad family iconography familiar from Syria. Assad in his paratrooper fatigues, Assad the general in a peaked cap, Assad the statesman, international pinstripe, Assad's dead son Basil in his trademarker reflector shades. Sometimes the poster hagiography became more whimsical. On one Syrian pillbox, Assad and Basil were transformed into the idiom of Haight-Ashbury flower children, their scowling faces hanging from the stalks of bright, naively painted sunflowers. At other times, the iconography of the different power brokers in Lebanon was strangely intermingled, so that pin-ups of Assad, Basil, Hariri, and a brace of turbaned Iranian mullahs, popular among the Shia of the Bekaa, would appear together on a single crash barrier, sometimes in the unlikely company of a leggy Lebanese chanteuse or some sequined Egyptian movie starlet. Perhaps strangest of all were the unlikely lines of hoardings that rose above the forbidding ruins lining the highway. A smiling Claudia Schiffer stretched out leopard-like in Salvatore Ferragamo, next to a yellow sandstone French colonial villa, so riddled with great round shrapnel holes it resembled an outsized slice of Emmental cheese. The Marlborough cowboy in his 10-gallon hat and herd of steers beaming out over an apocalyptic wasteland of shattered tower blocks. A metal tube of body mist on Beaucourt Saint-Effort set against the carbon black skeleton of twisted metal that had once been a filling station. From the bottom of the Bekaa, we crawled sluggishly up a narrow ridge, a single line of traffic moving behind a pair of massive Syrian tank transporters, until, at the top, we found ourselves looking down from an unexpected eminence through a fog of smog over the ruins of Beirut to the shattered mirror of the Mediterranean beyond. The Thunderbird's outsized bonnet swung over the hogsback of the ridge, and we were off. Down we twisted through a series of S-bends, under the ruins, past the posters. Salvatore Ferragamo pour hiver, an Ottoman villa pockmarked with small arm fire. Valentino en exclusivité, a Bible black hearse parched outside a church. Martini, right here, right now, 2 decapitated palm trees. Calvin by Calvin Klein, a dead tank. Cool Budweiser on tap, a bombed-out hospital. Lucky Strike, a cluster of skyscrapers, so pockmarked with shrapnel, they began to look like a mouthful of severely rotten teeth. Versatile by Versace. It was like a morality tale, spiraling downwards through one of the greatest monuments to human frailty, a huge vortex of greed and envy, resentment and intolerance, hatred and materialism, a 5-mile slalom of shell holes and designer labels, heavy artillery and glossy boutiques. Like a modern updating of a Byzantine apocalypse, it was the confusion that was most hell-like. Ayatollah Khomeini, hands raised in blessing, shared a billboard with a bottle of American aftershave. Below, huge American cars, Thunderbirds, Chevrolets, Corvettes, roared past building sites where monstrous machines, thickly carapaced like metal-clad cockroaches, moved earth, demolished ruins, dug holes. Occasionally there was a small explosion and a mushroom cloud of dust as a doomed tower block crashed to the earth, nudged by one of the grunting metal beetles below. Yet for all the destruction, in some places the shrapnel marks were strangely beautiful, like a Kandinsky abstract, a perfect peppering of dots and dashes. It was a tribute to the arms dealer's art, a hail of metal perfectly distributed across the plaster canvas. Even the hideous ruins of 60s blocks had a strange fascination. Some appeared as if newly built, only the puncture mark of a massive shell hole through the lateral wall of an apartment indicated what had happened to its interior and its occupants. Others were utterly wrecked. A single wall remained like a gravestone to mark the whereabouts of an entire tower block. At a distance, an oblique exclamation of concrete and a tangle of metal rods, the building's top story, would remain where it had landed in the aftermath of the blast or the collapse. Strangest of all were those blocks where the collapsed concrete stories were now folded down on top of each other, like a pile of neatly pressed shirts that had been left hanging off the edge of an ironing board. Thick layers of pre-stressed concrete curved over the edge of a 100-foot drop, like soft folds of cotton. Despite the mess, astonishingly, the great majority of the wrecked apartments were still inhabited. In some whose walls were so eroded by shrapnel, they resembled pieces of chronically worm-eaten wood. I would notice washing hanging out to dry, or perhaps a shadowy figure taking the air of a half-collapsed balcony. As twilight fell over the ruined city, pale and ghostly lights began to come on in one after another of the abandoned apartment blocks. The ruins, it seemed, were vertical shanty towns. Makeshift billets for impoverished Shia labourers or homeless Palestinians, all rushing to fill the vacuum left by the rehoused rich. Most had patched up their flats with pieces of corrugated iron or slashes of black plastic sheeting, but many others, perhaps the newest arrivals, had not. As we drove past, I found I could look into the illuminated interiors of these people's flats, for they were missing walls or had such huge shell holes that entire suites of rooms were opened up for public inspection, like some outsized advent calendar. In one flat, I saw a man getting dressed, nonchalantly pulling on his jeans. It was an unremarkable everyday scene, except that the front wall of his apartment had entirely disappeared, so that he was framed by the black concrete superstructure around him, lit up like a cinema screen in a dark auditorium.